Good morning and welcome to this WIOA Wednesday webinar. My name is Molly Cook and I'm joined by my colleague Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. We will be the moderators for today's webinar. Today's topic is Demand Occupation Trading List Guidance. As a reminder that all participants on the call are in listen-only mode and cannot unmute themselves. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post those questions in the Q&A or chat box, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. And as time permits, we will also be looking for questions as the webinar progresses. A reminder that this webinar will be recorded. The presentation, recording, and any materials presented during the meeting today will be available on the icsps.illinoisstate.edu website and on Illinois WorkNet within 48 hours. Kirsten also posted a link to the slides in the chat box. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning, as well as the recorded session will encompass closed captioning. At the end of the webinar and tomorrow, each attendee will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking you about the webinar. Please provide feedback and any suggestions you have to help improve upcoming webinars. I'll also put that survey link in the chat box near the end of today. A reminder that if you have a faulty internet connection or would prefer to call in, you can do so by calling into the webinar using the phone number in your original registration email. And I'll also put that number in the chat box. So if you can go to the next slide, Mark, we're going to, it actually might be 2 slides. We are going to start with polls that we start with for each of our webinars. So our first poll we have is, which partner do you represent? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer that question. Okay, so as you can see, we have all the titles present. We have quite a few from Title I, and we also have WIOA partners and stakeholders and state and local workforce innovation board members. So welcome to all. And the next poll question we have is, where is your local area? All right, we have folks from throughout the state here and a good spread. So again, welcome to everyone. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Today's presenters are going to be myself, Mark Burgess, and Paula Berry. And our objectives for today's webinar include an overview of the Demand Occupation Training List, or DOTL, notice that we put out, which includes the guiding framework developed by the Eligible Training Provider, or ETPL, policy work group of the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board. Mark will provide an overview of the Demand Occupation Petition form and the accompanying instructions. And he will also go over the information and data expected to be submitted as justification with the petition request. Finally, Mark and Paula will be leading a discussion on what career planning should be done in order to strengthen the informed decision making.
Laura, it's Molly. We're having a little bit of a hard time with hearing. So I wonder if, I don't know if talking a little closer to your computer or potentially calling in for audio.
Okay. I'm also fighting a cold, so I'm sure that's not helping out either.
That actually sounds like we can hear you better now, actually.
All right, thank you so much. WIOA requires that training be directly linked to an in-demand sector or occupation. Our state policy 7.3, which covers training provider and training program eligibility, contains a section on Illinois' demand occupation list. The Illinois Workforce Innovation Board created an ETPL policy work group to review and update the existing policy. And one of the charges of the work group was to create a new demand occupations training list. This slide provides the definition of an in-demand industry sector or occupation. In order to create the list, the state must further define the framework criteria for inclusion and exclusion of certain occupations onto the list. When we are asked why an occupation makes the list or not, these are the highlighted areas are the things that we look at. And through the petition process, which will be explained later, local areas can petition to show that there has been changes in occupations in a local area and can justify adding new occupations or sectors to the list. The current ETPL policy has been revised with the release of the Demand Occupation Trainings List Notice. Note that only the section that pertained to the Demand Occupation Training List has been revised, and it references the notice. Once the ETPL policy work group finalizes their work and releases an updated policy, which will include updates to the initial and continued eligibility determination process, the total notice will be incorporated back into the policy. And we will talk about the last two dot points, the exceptions and the demand occupation petitions, later on in this presentation. There are exceptions to the required use of the demand occupation training list, the registered apprenticeship programs, any training that is provided via contract, such as OJT, incumbent worker training, or customized training, or any career service, such as work experience, do not have to use the demand occupation training list. Demand occupation training list is only required when training services are provided through ITAs or individual training accounts. This slide, it is the IWIB's responsibility to develop the policy on the ETPL, which includes the demand occupation training list. The IWIB put together a work group with defined charges to work on an updated policy. The work group is led from consultants. The work group is led from consultants from the Northern Illinois University, and has members from the IWIB, local partners, including those responsible for maintaining the ETPL at the local level, and other core partners. They have collected mounds of research from other states, other state policies, and federal guidance to shape the discussions of this work group. These discussions have led to the determination to maintain a single statewide list versus 10 separate regional lists, and we'll talk about that in more detail. This slide provides the basic constant set of criteria that was agreed upon by the work group. For the education level, a minimum education level for an occupation was set at high school diploma or equivalent and a moderate OJT. A maximum level was established at a bachelor degree with long-term on-the-job training. The wages limitation was set at 85% of the living wage. So for Illinois, that was determined to be $22.51. And the annual average job openings had to be equal to at least 1/100th of a percent of statewide employment, which turned out to be 646 annual openings. These are the additional factors that contributed to an occupational placement, and they are listed with color coding. Occupations that meet all the criteria are reflected in the high priority category, which you'll note is a green category. Occupations that approach but do not meet the state-based criteria are in the growth or moderate category, which is yellow. Other occupations which meet state priorities, such as early child education, emergency response, targeted populations, talent pipeline management, and anything added by state or local petition, including those occupations added through the National Dislocated Worker Grants, are included in the orange category, are added by petition. Any occupations not meeting the criteria not approved by petition are not demand occupation, and they are not available for selection. And those are reflected as red or low priority or no priority, basically, for inclusion into our occupations available for selection for training. This is added for comparison, so you can easily see what's changed from the old list into the new list. The old list was a regional list, and we had 10 separate lists. Now we have one single statewide list. Our old annual average job openings was greater than or equal to 25 in an EDR. Now that has been changed, and our annual average job openings is equivalent to 646. Our moderate demand is anything in the yellow category, is anything greater than 400 annual average job openings. The entry wage used to be greater than 90% of the average EDR negotiated wage rate, but we've decided on the new list that is set at the 85% of the living wage. There was no education level criteria in the old list, and there now is in the new list. And there was a state priority additions in the old list, but we do have state priority additions in the new list, but those are all identified as an orange tiered occupation. We did have career clusters for the old list, and there are no career clusters now for the new list. And we do now have the ability for local areas to petition to add an occupation. The occupational tiers, this graphic and table shows the information here. The color coding and the different, the graphic is probably a little difficult to read, but it is included in the notice as far as what the different levels of advanced education and middle skills, even though those are both green high priority, there is a little bit different. So it does go through and show you how they are set and how the occupations are identified. They are clearly identified by color and label, and so hopefully this will assist career planners in their work to help with informed decision making. This graphic was also included in the notice. It's something to assist local career planners in determining the demand codes and the education levels easier. We used codes instead in the actual list, and therefore you can come back to these summary tables to see exactly what the occupation falls under. This slide is actually a sample of the demand occupation training list. It may be different. As you know, we highly encourage everyone to go out either to the ePolicy portal to grab the latest demand occupation training list, or go on the Illinois WorkNet site to get it, and Paula and Mark will discuss that a little bit later. But the demand occupation training list, this one just gives you a snapshot, and it shows the codes and the employment openings based on that 6,460,465 openings in 2018, which is the latest data available from the Illinois Department of Employment Security. So that is the basis for the 646 annual job openings. This has the education OJT code and the median wage and the demand code. So again, you can go back to that table earlier in the notice, and that shows you the different things that are the different categories. We've also color coded them here to help make it easier for the career planners to be able to easily identify. Off to the side, you will notice that in the far column, if an occupation has been petitioned, And if the occupation has been petitioned and has been added, it has been, it's identified in that far column. So for example, 493011 was petitioned by the Illinois Workforce Partnership and added, and therefore that's a way for everyone to easily identify things that have been added through petition. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to Mark. He's going to discuss how local areas can petition to make the code available for selection under the orange category.
Thanks, Laura. Sorry about the audio on Laura's side. As she mentioned, she's a little bit feeling under the weather a little bit today, so appreciate that she was able to get through her section. We'll move on to the petition. We did have a question in the chat box that I'll go ahead and respond again to on audio in case somebody is just listening via their telephone. But someone had asked if there's a petition by a local area board, will that be available to everyone? And the answer to that is yes. All petitions, the list itself is statewide. We do not have any EDR list specific anymore, like Laura said, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more, and the career planning discussions and decisions that need to accompany those kind of occupations, because and the petition does indicate that the job did not meet the minimum criterias. And then let's go ahead and go through this petition process. So if there's an occupation that you see as a local area, you need to work with your local boards to submit it to petition using the OET DOTL form 001. It does have to come from your local board, so the local board staff can work with the Title I administrators once these are identified to complete the petition. We'll show you a sample of what that looks like. You may collaborate with other boards to submit these petitions. So if you don't know if the information in your local area is strong enough to support an approval of the petition, you might work with your neighbor local areas and local boards to provide data and information that would support our review and approval of those occupations. In most instances, we'll be doing that internally, the approval process, but in some instances, depending on the request, whether they be by specifically by the, for a talent pipeline or a dislocated worker grant or other grants, we might need to bring in local area partners or some of our consultants that work with those programs a little more closely. So there is a team that actually reviews and approves these. Petitions should be submitted for a single occupation. Multiple occupations would require multiple petitions, and the reason for that is that we are needing specific information, specific employer need support and justification, and so we need to look at those on a case-by-case basis. The form is here. You can find it on the WIOA Notice, WIOA Notice 20-NOT-08, which is tied to the ETPL policy Laura referenced earlier, which is policy 7.3. It is an attachment to that. There are also instructions there. So you'll need to go out to the policy website on Illinois WorkNet to find the actual form. It is a fillable PDF. So all these fields can easily be completed online. You don't have to print these off. Some of this is basic information. The top half of this didn't change or changed very little from the previous version of the petition form, or at that time we called it a request form. The bottom half is where we really need the justification. So while there's very little space to put information here, we expect that we see attached documents that provide opening data, updated openings data or wage data, employer statements indicating their needs because of plant expansion or new plant openings. And then if you've got a particular grant, we're currently looking at a dislocated worker grant, and potentially adding the occupations related to that grant. So there are many ways that a local board could find need in petitioning for an occupation or occupations. So don't hesitate to gather that information and submit it. You can't provide us too much information in my mind. The more you provide us, the better and stronger case you have for us to consider these, and we'll approve them as necessary. And we've already done that, as Laura mentioned, on the right-hand side of the demand occupation training list. If there's an indication that a local board petition that, we'll identify that board. Or initially we had the entire local workforce board under the guidance of the Illinois Workforce Partnership as their staff, submitted a list of occupations that we considered, and a number of those we approved prior to issuing the new demand occupation training list. Some of those were not meeting the necessary data to add to the list. Some of them didn't have any information at all, so we had nothing to work from. So we asked the IWP to resubmit them if they still want them considered. And so, don't hesitate to submit, but it isn't an automatic approval process. We'll talk about the justifications a little bit more. So here's the form. I think the strongest justification is really that you can just show employer need. So if the data doesn't support the occupation being on the list, then the employers need to provide you some updated information that shows openings, shows higher wages than what the statewide wage might indicate, and show what the training needs are. So if by chance an occupation did not make the list because it only required a high school equivalency or diploma, but the employers in your local area are asking for higher education levels in order to qualify for that job, be eligible for that job as far as their interview and hiring process, then we need to know that. You may have many ways of finding the data and information, but employer letters that indicate that you have worked with them on developing a career pathway for individuals, and now you need these occupations added, would be very strong indication to us that it might be something of value to add to the list. With all of these, again, we need these submitted by the local board. I'll go back one step. I want to remind everyone that as a fillable form, we've allowed an electronic signature by the board chairperson. So you don't have to wait to print off a document, send it to the board chair, understanding their busy schedules, wait for them to sign it, scan it, send it back to you if you're working with them as staff or the local area that's actually submitting this. So they can electronically sign this. This is in keeping with a lot of the direction that we received when COVID hit and we couldn't get physical signings on our documents. We shifted many of those document signing abilities to an electronic version, and so we're doing that with this as well. I am indicating that maybe there's some issues. Molly, I don't know if you want to expand on what you got. She just went on to the forum.
We're all set.
I'm sorry, Molly, was the form working? If not, we'll need to correct that.
I think we're all set on this end. Thanks, though.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. And then all those submissions need to go to the email address here below. It's a general email for the demand occupation training list for any questions you might have. And the reason we want to use this list is because there's a team of 3 of us. All of you are familiar with Paula Berry in the performance unit, myself, and then we also have Shannon Hampton. So I want to acknowledge her. She's been involved throughout this process of developing the list and walking through some scenarios of what would be needed to get an approval or not. She helped with assisting in approving those IWP requests, as well as the local board that has already submitted requests. So The three of us will receive those. Any one of us can then address it, as opposed to you sending it to one of us who may be out of the office for a day or multiple days on leave status. So we do ask that you submit all of these through this general OET email. Keep that handy, and we will respond to that in a timely fashion. Here's the information specific. I showed you the form itself. With the ONet codes, the primary ONet code on the form has to be the one you're petitioning to be added to the demand occupation training list. There are fields for additional ONet codes, and the reason why we want to see those is it might help us identify the true needs in the local area, because there are ancillary jobs available. There are training programs already developed that would address the need in a very quick fashion. You just need to get the occupation onto the list. So any other ONet codes that you want to add to those petitions, please do. We only need the 6-digit code. I know if some of you are familiar with the online ONet system or website, they do have some of these in an 8-digit code. There's an extension beyond a decimal point that are available. We don't need that depth. Just include the 6-digit occupation, and we'll be able to work with that. We'll be doing research and find out those other occupations to see how they might play into our review and determination. And then also include, if there is a training program already available through your providers, include those SIP codes so that we can again tie those together and identify not only the needs of the employer, but also what's already available as far as training programs and programs of study for the participants. If you don't have that, if maybe you're starting at the very beginning of this process, nobody has a training program out there, then we understand that might be blank. Back to the supporting justification, it's very important that you give us as much detail. This is really where we're probably going to get most of our petitions, is showing there's some employer need. We hope to be getting data and information from the Employment Security Department on a much more frequent basis than in the past. Unfortunately, that was delayed in our earlier version of the demand list, and so we had a list that kind of languished for quite a few years. We hope to get that data on a more frequent basis, and so we'll be able to update the list accordingly, but it may not still be supporting the criteria for approval. So it's this employer need that really is what's going to get your petition the strongest consideration. If they have a number of openings, not to say that it has to meet the minimum job openings that reach the criteria, but if there's a significant number of openings in your local area, let's say a plant expansion of another 50 employees, and they all need to be trained above a high school equivalency plus some moderate OJT, then that's a pretty significant consideration for us to know or information to know and consider in our review and approval. Again, if there are wages at a higher level than what's necessary to meet the criteria, then we would like to know that. If you can get some commitments from your employers, get some letters from them that indicate we've been working with our local partners, and we know of the value that the WIOA system, especially in that local area, provides them, they may be able to indicate that they would put priority towards the WIOA participants that come out of the system locally. And so, we would know then, not necessarily that it's a guarantee that they would get those jobs, but that they certainly are considering them and understand again the value of those versus the general population that go through training programs, because that's what we're competing with. We're not the only ones that are looking for jobs. Our participants aren't the only ones looking for jobs. And so just because a plant might have 50 openings doesn't mean all 50 of those will be filled or can be filled by WIOA participants. So we want to show the strongest case that employer is certainly considering our population. If you have multiple employer support, if you noticed on the form, we've asked for at least up to 3 employers, but if you have more employers that have some of the similar needs, I'm thinking in the current climate, in the warehousing and transportation sector, there might be a lot of, especially in the northern and even the southwest areas of the state, might be considerable warehousing operations that have the same needs. Get those employers together and submit their those needs and their numbers to us. And again, we'll be able to strengthen your case as you submit those. And then document all of these. You know, we can't receive too many documents, too many papers, too much information. The more we receive, the better it might help making us or help us understand what we're looking at. Other considerations for these petitions, you know, you might have a local plan or regional plan that has a focus that currently the demand list doesn't address. Let us know what that is. Show us all the information you use to put that into your plan to show that it was a priority at that local or regional level. We're going to be doing that at the statewide level. So we'll be looking at the unified plan to see what priorities are there. Certainly, as I mentioned before, Laura had said as well, if there's a particular grant that is serving the WIOA population that needs training participants to complete and then enter into those jobs, we need to know that. If there's emergency response early on to the COVID pandemic, we knew there were some new jobs that came up. The contact tracers was something totally new to all of us. So we looked at that, and I want to say that we added that or ensured that that was on the list. That occupation was defined and on the list, so that all of the areas across the state and you know, the same need was across the nation, but across the state could get people into those jobs. And finally, I'll reiterate another time, you can't provide too much supporting documentation. I mentioned we did receive some requests already. When you receive those, if you submitted those requests, whether you're the local board or the Illinois Workforce Partnership, we try to do our best to identify what we looked at and how we made our decision. So we're going to do that with all of our future petitions. So if your local board submits the petition, you'll know why we approved it or why we didn't approve it. And here are some considerations we made this time around. Some of them were actually on the demand occupation training list. I'll take partial, if not full, responsibility for the fact the paper version of the demand list that was made available through prior policy had not been updated effectively through all the various revisions that occurred in the Illinois Workforce Development System. So some people might have been looking at that paper list, hard copy, in determining there was a need for an occupation when in fact it was already on the list. So there was no action necessary in that. Some of the instances, new data was available or provided during or in the petition. So we were easily able to approve those with that information. And again, we already have added some state priorities such as early education, early childhood education. So there's a lot of teacher occupations made the list based on the criteria, but there were a few that did not. We went ahead and added those as a group. But there were some that were denied. And again, going back to the information that needs to be provided, some of them had no data or information. So we couldn't make a decision because we had nothing to review other than what we had in front of us from the IDS data. Some of them were either higher than the education level that was approved for the criteria or lower than the education level. And to reiterate again, anything above a bachelor's degree, requiring a bachelor's degree plus long-term OJT will not make this list. The reason for that, and I really want to appreciate the support of the local board, or I'm sorry, the local area members that were on this work group, because they did support this. But we feel like the dollars need to be spent in this middle category of high school education with moderate OJT up to bachelor's plus long-term OJT. If an individual wants to go on to their master's degree, we just feel like that's a large output of dollars that could be spent on multiple participants in other areas. So anything above a bachelor's degree, long-term OJT did not make the list. Anything below a high school equivalency or diploma and moderate OJT did not make the list. And those are probably going to be rejected in most cases. We obviously will take petitions and look at them, and with some justification might find a different avenue to get those approved. But for the most part, if that's the only thing you have as support, we're probably going to have a hard time approving that. And in some instances, the data and information that was available didn't support an approval, such as one employer indicated they had 2 openings. That's not much demand in our minds. We know there's demand in your area, but again, there's probably other areas you can focus on with your local efforts, your current planning, your participants. And so we did reject a few of those, denied approval because there just didn't seem to be a true need. And going back to Laura's initial slides about what WIOA is focusing on, we're looking for good jobs with good wages, and you know, there's got to be a need out there for us to give an approval. And just a couple other stats there show that there were 30 of them where codes changed. So we did our own background information check to find out what the new codes were or what the old codes were, matched them up the best we could. Some of them didn't come with codes. We did our best to find a code that seemed as close as possible to the title, the occupational title that was given. And then there were 82 occupations that we rejected because there was no justification. So we left a lot out there for IWP to go back to kind of the drawing board and see if there's some information and submitting of petitions for consideration. And then finally, I mentioned some of this already, but we do want you to submit these in this into this email address that we provide here, so that all 3 of us on the review team will get that. If one of us is away, somebody else can address it. In many of these instances, one person probably can make a decision based on, you know, some of the internal review process we've developed, that we don't have to, you know, come together as a three-person team to review these. But in some instances, we will have to wait for all of us to be together to review that. We hope to have these initially reviewed within 5 business days of receipt, so that if we have to request additional information from you or from the board, we can get back to you as soon as possible. And then hopefully all of these will be done within 10 business days. You'll get a response within 10 business days. My estimation is we'll do all of this in a much shorter time frame, but we didn't want to overcommit ourselves in case there is a situation where it's a difficult decision and all of us aren't available. We have to reach out to the local partners or our consultants or others within OET to help us make a decision. So, you know, we know there's sometimes urgency in this. We understand that. So we want to make a decision as quick as possible. We also want to make a wise decision based on the information we have. Illinois WorkNet and IWDS systems will be updated accordingly as we submit our response if there's an approval. We'll have to also work with our partners up there in local area 7 to get their system of record updated as well, so it reflects appropriately and selections can be made. And then finally, if it's approved, if an occupation is approved, it stays on the list until the next demand occupation training list is updated. We want to continue to show current demand. We don't want to be training for jobs that are no longer in demand. So we want to have as current information as possible to base our decisions on in creating the list. And so as new information becomes available from IDS or other sources, we'll be creating new lists. We hope that occurs about every 2 years, so that we show that relevancy to today's market, today's industry, today's economy, and not something that's several years into the past. So I think I'll take a couple questions. I don't know, Molly, were there any that were outstanding? I noticed a lot of questions were getting answered by Laura. If there's anything that we should answer on the petition right now, I'll go ahead and do that. If you can review those for me.
Yeah, Laura has been doing an amazing job answering the questions. The only one, and Laura, you'll have to tell me if I missed the answer to this. There was one question in the Q&A that said, how did you determine the OJT number?
The OJT number, that chart that Laura provided, I apologize, I can't tell you what the source is, but it's part of the data that we were given from Northern Illinois University, who assisted us in reviewing the IDS data and coming up with the demand occupation training list. So it's a standard list of numbers assigned to each of those levels on the education and OJT chart that Laura showed. So that way, as we move forward looking at new data, we're going to see the same number coding towards the actual education level. Yeah, so it's standardized and something that we don't anticipate should change anytime soon. To Dina's question about the denial of occupations based on education level, the IWP, I sent it to both Michelle Cerruti, the past president, and Lisa Bly Jones, because we're in this transition period of her becoming the new president. And congratulations to you, Lisa. I don't know who is the new vice president, but we look forward to working with all of you in the future. But within the response, it did indicate all of the occupations that did not meet based on the education level. So hopefully that they can share that with everybody. If you're not part of the IWP meetings, or if Michelle, Lisa, if you've not shared that, maybe you consider your next meeting sharing that out and letting everyone see that, so that they can, go back to their local boards and say, well, these are ones that were already asked for. Do we want to pursue it further or not? And do the legwork of getting the data and information we'll need. Congratulations, Tony. Love working with you over the years, and look forward to working with you in the coming years as vice president, and then hopefully as president. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. It seems like we've answered all the questions. If we do have any outstanding questions at the end, we'll come back to the petition document. So we're developing technical support and information for all of you to keep you updated as much as possible. This slide kind of depicts what you see on the WIOA e-policy page. In this instance, this is the right-hand sidebar for the ETPL policy. If you were to open up that actual policy 7.3, you would see all of these categories: technical assistance, policy reference, attachments, on down to notices. So you see the notices. Here's where you can get the actual demand list. You can get the form. You can get the instructions to the form. And in those instructions, there's a little bit more detail about that justification that you should be supplying. But we will be developing an FAQ or Q&A, whichever one we call it, and putting that up in the technical assistance resources. This video also will be a technical assistance resource to you. It's being recorded and will be placed out there. So you'll have any number of ways to keep up to date. As we issue approvals or denials to local boards, those should be shared. Maybe IWP can coordinate those, so a local board can indicate to the others that through IWP that they've submitted a petition and it was either approved or denied. If it's approved, we will let you know as a group, similar to how Laura submits policy in general. We'll let you know through an email that certain codes and titles were added to the list. We'll indicate and provide the updated list that indicates and shows signification of that. So just keep looking for emails and that. When we get petitions, we'll make sure we'll do our best to add these to the list. So there are inherent obstacles to the demand occupations. We heard your issues locally with regional lists at times over the years, and in searching through the revisions, we decided to make a statewide list. As Laura mentioned, it was a work group decision as a whole that we would go to a statewide list. In doing so, there's no significance of where the occupations or what the wages are. So it really is incumbent upon, and we're going to talk more about career planning as we go through this webinar, but it's really upon career planners to do their due diligence in finding the data and information relative to them locally and sharing that with the participant so that an educated decision can be made. Just because a demand occupation is in a particular tier, even though green seems like it's the highest tier, and it is, it met all of the qualifications, up and including bachelor's degrees, that doesn't mean it's a demand in your local area. So you always have to be mindful and cognizant that you should be looking for the data that's relevant to you in making decisions. Now, we do have to acknowledge that in a statewide list, it's dominated by information that might come from the northeast area of the state, but that's not true in all cases. If you remember the old 10 EDR list, there were a few occupations that appeared in other economic development regions and not in all of the regions or only in LWIA 7 or EDR 4, the entire six LWIAs that comprise EDR 4. So we just ask that, and again, we'll touch on this a little bit more detail, but we just ask you be mindful that every occupation has its inherent obstacle to employment, meaning what are the actual openings that my participant, yours as a career planner, need to consider, and what are the wages related to that, and what are the education levels. Research, we ask that you do that research. The lower tier occupations obviously bring even more obstacles because they have less openings or their wages are below the minimum, the actual living wage. So do the research, talk with your participant, and make an educated decision as a group. All these decisions should be made at the local level or with a local perspective, I should say. Here's the list again. Considerations. Demand statewide is not indicative of the demand in every region or local workforce area. And some of these are repetitive, I apologize. So in your area, is it truly in demand? First, you're deciding, is it on the list? Okay, now that it's on the list, is it in demand in my area? If yes, great. Are there similar occupations that maybe the participant should consider that meets their goals, that they're eligible or suitable for employment, suitable for training? So maybe they can just shift their focus a little bit to an occupation that actually is in demand and on the list to improve their potential with successful completion and exit from the program to getting that job. And if it's not in demand, then we go to the petition process. So, work with your board, work with your board staff to submit a petition if you think it's a valuable addition to the list and you have the justification to support that. And then what other considerations should we be aware of? We're going to go into that in multiple slides here upcoming. All right, so the tiers again, don't dictate, or tiers of occupation should dictate those discussions. So again, the higher the tier, you know what you've already got in front of you as far as information. The higher the tier, you know what the education is. And in no instances, if you're in tiers 1 through 6, are those occupations requiring more than that bachelor's degree and long-term OJT, or less than the high school equivalency and moderate OJT? So again, remind you, there is no flexibility in those. But what you do find in those yellow and potentially the orange color-coded occupations is that they are below the minimum rates of job openings. So the 646 has been lowered to 400 in order to meet the tiers in the yellow category, or the wage rate was below the 2648 hourly wage. So the tier kind of gives you some information, but it doesn't give you all of the information. And then a reminder again, Laura touched on some of the exceptions that are found in current ETPL policy, eligible training provider list policies. We'll be discussing those exceptions as we revise the policy itself, and we'll let you know in policy revisions if those change at all. So here we get into the real crux of this demand list. It's one thing to put a list out and say, here's what you can train to, but as hopefully you're all gathering, there are things we have to consider in order to make wise decisions. And so, we need to make sure the career planners understand and are thinking of all of these things as they move along with their participants. Make sure you're doing a full assessment. What are their skills? What are their interests? What's their work history? Do they have any barriers? And what is their expectations of a job? And then what are the documentation that you need for that? These should all be recorded in their individual service strategy if they're a youth, and there are some youth that apply, that the DETPL applies to if they're using an individual training account. And then for the adult dislocated worker population in their individual employment plan or IEP. So right now, anyone that's going to enter training services, enroll in a training program must have an IEP. IWDS and signifies that when you go in there and try and enroll someone in training, you can't get through that without ensuring that you added an IEP, as well as our co-enrollees from the trade program are all required to have an IEP. Again, we're trying to assist the participant in making the wisest decision possible in selecting an occupation that they can then select the appropriate training for. And then we want you to ensure that an IEP is documenting all of this or in case notes throughout this process. So we know what their goals are. We know the steps they plan on taking, the services they anticipate they'll need to get a successful outcome. And then, the key to this all is we want this to lead to sustainable employment. Not something that they enroll in and complete training and get hired in, and 6 months later they realize it's not a job for them for whatever reason. Hopefully, that's going to happen to a small percentage of people, but hopefully we've done our research and explained to them through all the resources available kind of what this job entails without actually conducting the job or being employed in the job. Again, after you've done your assessment and determined the career interest, as a career planner, we want to ask these questions. Is the career in demand? Is it in demand in our area or your area? What is the living wage in your area? So maybe the statewide living wage is actually not indicative of your local area. So, maybe you don't think that's high enough because you're in an area where the actual wages have improved to a point that your median wages in a particular occupation are higher. And in order to meet the expectations of a family, maybe that occupation that the employee, or I'm sorry, the participant is considering aren't high enough wages to meet their financial goals. And then again, is the training program suitable for the participant and vice versa? Are they going to be able to even enroll in the training? Are there prerequisites that they need before they enroll in the training? Are they able to complete the training with the skills, education, knowledge they already have, and what they could gain through that training program? What should the participant consider? Where are the jobs? What are the wages? If the jobs aren't in my area, am I willing to move? What are the education? Do I really want to enroll in a bachelor's level degree, which is might be the only qualification for the job, and a high school equivalency or even an associate's degree wouldn't prepare you effectively for that job. So, they've got to know how far they want to take their education and training, where they at in their training already, and understanding knowledge and work experience to even be eligible to enroll in a training program. Are the credentials, certifications, licensure something that the participant is willing to pursue? It's not only the training program they got to complete, but some occupations require these certifications and licensures that they have to complete either during training or afterwards, and they've got to be able to commit to that and again document that in the IEP. Through the gaps in knowledge, skills, abilities is how you're going to find that out, and then you're going to discuss that with the participant and ensure that they're comfortable with that. What are the activities that this job entails? What are the working conditions? And again, try to prepare them as best as possible to understand a job that they haven't conducted yet, that they haven't participated in yet, but know that these are coming if they actually complete the program, exit our program, and get hired into the position. And then just to repeat, does it align with what they're looking for? So you kind of go back to that last question, I would think, throughout this process, because the participant might be adjusting their interests as they get more and more knowledge. They might have walked in thinking, hey, I just need a job, and then you say, well, with that information, here's what you can receive, and they might realize that, no, well, I'm going through training program. I want something that pays higher than something that doesn't include or entail going through a training program. So, everything changes. The IEP should document that, and we'll know through reviews that has been conducted. And in fact, monitoring reviews will be reviewing IEPs for that. DOL has made it clear to us that we should be ensuring documentation of the IEP is sufficient to warrant these decisions. And so, you know, we ask that the career planners are mindful of the documentation necessary. So with all that information, we thought we'd throw you a scenario of how this all plays out. So this is, you know, customer one walks in the door. They're from Heron, Illinois, which is Economic Development Region 8, LWIA 25, which, as you recall from, you know, prior discussion, lists aren't built on EDRs anymore, but we certainly should know and have information in front of us regarding that EDR and specifically the local area where the participant not only lives, but is willing to commute to work. They're interested in automotive body and related repairs. The code for that is 49-3021. Currently, that's on the demand occupation training list, meets the criteria as a category or a tier 4. So as you'll note down here, the openings meet the 646 minimum, but it does not meet the minimum wage. It marginally misses it by about $1. But again, that fits itself into the growth tier. We have a lot of need, but the wages are a little bit lower than the criteria. We've allowed a little bit of leeway of 85%, as you'll recall in the framework Laura talked about. So we know we have a demand occupation. What do we do next? So I'm going to throw you a few statistics. I did your research for it. I didn't expect you to do that now. We find out that in your local area and actually in your economic development region, there are only 6 average annual job openings predicted or projected. So that's not much need. Even though it's a demand occupation statewide, it's not really much of a need in your area. That doesn't mean it can't be trained for it. That doesn't mean the individual isn't perfectly suited for that job if they complete the training. Just need to be mindful. There's not going to be very many openings for them when they complete that training. The actual wages down in that area are only $18.31. So while the state wage for that occupation is above $20, it's only $18 or so down in your local area based on wage data that we can look at from 2020. So again, is the customer interested in a job that pays $18.31 to start, or as a median wage, I should say? And then the third criteria, are they willing to go through some long-term OJT? Do they have a high school diploma or equivalency already? And if not, are they willing to take that and get that certification? So there's your 3 criteria. We indicate some local information applied to it. And then finally, you talk a little bit about the occupation. You're going to be working with a team, maybe uncomfortable conditions. There may not be heating or air conditioning in some of these settings. There's going to be some safety concerns. Are they willing to abide by those? And there might be need for overtime to ensure that they're meeting the needs of the customer of a potential employer. So again, we did a little bit of the research for you as a career planner, and now we need you to answer a poll. If you put that up, Molly. So our scenario states that we are interested in the moderate demand tier 4 occupation. What is the best response of these 4 to the knowledge you have already? And I'll let you each read those and decide on the best response once you're able to complete it. All right, we've got quite a few of you already. I do want to thank all of you for joining us today. It looked like we've got almost 200 people on this call, so that's one of our larger efforts as far as providing WIOA Wednesday webinars. So I appreciate everyone joining us. Quite a few have responded. So in this scenario, actually the best response would be number 3, or the third one. And I'll quickly go through those. So the first option is this is only considered demand if the wages for the LWIA are above the threshold. While we want you to consider the local LWIA wages, that's not a determining factor of whether this is actually in demand. So, you know, some might consider that a little bit of a trick question, but this is in demand. It's on the demand occupation training list because it met met all of the criteria necessary. Second option is this is not a demand occupation, thus cannot be selected. So I just answered that as well, that it is actually in demand. The fourth option is the local workforce board would determine if this is in demand based on available training programs related to the occupation. And the reason why we put that in there is because while occupations and training programs work hand in hand, Paula will touch on this a little bit more in a future slides, but you can't select a training program to be determined eligible without a kind of an associated demand occupation. But there will be instances where there might be a training program approved and that demand occupation may fall off the list because of updated data and information. And I mentioned earlier, there's a kind of and Paul, I'm sorry, Laura talked to it. There's a kind of a period of time where we allow you to continue to work with your participants. We don't ask you to switch the dial because some occupations might have fallen off of a list based on new data. If there's been significant progress made towards determining an appropriate occupation and identifying appropriate training. So there may be instances where a training program remains on the list, but there's no longer an associated demand occupation. So that for that reason, 4 is not the appropriate or best response. So the third response is this is actually in demand, as the criteria indicates, and can be selected by the participants, but they have to develop a career plan that indicates that, have to be discussing this through fully with their career planner, documenting it in IWDS or Career Connect or whatever the system of record is at the time, and ensuring that the customer participant understands the level of openings, wages, education, and suitability for both training and employment that occupation presents to them. So 3 would be the best one. Like to see that most of you respond to that, but do appreciate all of you completing this poll. We'll move on and we'll go through a little bit more information around how you identify kind of some local data. So I'm going to give you kind of 5 or 6 resources to help you as career planners and even as local board staff and local boards identify, because this could be useful. One, if you have a demand occupation and you want to know how well it fits within your local area or economic development region. But for boards, if they need to submit a petition, it'll provide them some resources. So you can start with demand occupation search. This will be synced up with Illinois Workforce Development System, so it should always show the same data, but it's a much more user-friendly. All of those that use the WorkNet demand search over trying to find occupations in IWDS, give yourselves a little pat on the back for going the easy route, because it's much easier, much more efficient to use this site to identify demand occupations. You can put in the actual code. The EDR is there right now. We're in the middle of WorkNet updating their site, so we actually will take EDR away from the search function. We think in a mock-up that Paula will show later. We haven't finalized all the different changes, but we're going to show you what we think it's going to look like. So you would put your occupation in the code. You could do by keyword. So if you knew it was automotive, you could put that in. You would come up with multiple occupations that might be tied to automotive, which might be good for the participant to realize maybe this isn't the only job you should be considering. Let's look at multiple jobs in the automotive repair field and see if there are others that are also in demand. And as you see at the bottom, that comes up as 49, 30, 21. If you click on that, or here's the information you put in. If you click on that, first you'll get some detailed information below for that occupation. It indicates it's or not for that. This is in general. Sorry, not specific to the automotive job, but you'll see if there's something shows up in the list, you'll see the code. You'll see the occupations that are annual. You'll see the education level. So you'll see all the criteria that either got it on the list or didn't get it on the list right there in front of you. And then if you select the occupation specifically, you'll see some additional information that career planners should be discussing with the participant, especially the wages, the openings, what you need to prepare for that. So as you see on this, it says that you need a high school equivalent or diploma and some on the job training. And then you'll see some wages, you'll see some working conditions. So, not that Illinois WorkNet is the only system you can use, but obviously that's one that we would recommend highly for you to use. We work in conjunction with the WorkNet staff to develop this to meet the needs of policy and of the priorities of the workforce system. So it's certainly geared towards what you're going to need to research as a career planner. The next one would be ONet Online. And this, the real concern with going here is that sometimes, and it's the case right now, we're using 2010 versions of the ONet codes or the standard occupational classification codes, SOC. So those are kind of used interchangeably, SOC and ONet, but it really relates to the same thing. We're using 2010 codes because that's the most recent data available as far as wages and openings is tied to 2010 codes, but ONet is already updated to 2018 codes. So again, back to our research for the IWP request, we had to look at that and we had to map back to the 2010 codes that were requested to find the data appropriate to see if we could approve those or not. So you might have to do a little bit of work from ONet to find the actual occupation if it's changed. I would say probably 10–15% of the occupation codes might have changed. That's just a guess on my part, but so a lot of them will come up like this one will come up as the code you're familiar with, but it might come up something different. You might have to search by occupation up there in the search field at the top right. But if you find your occupation, this is some of the data available. Again, helps you speak with your participant, shows some related occupations there at the top of the list, and shows you Illinois specific, or you can go and plug in your zip code. 62918 relates to Heron. Unfortunately, there is no local data right now, so all you have in front of you is the Illinois actual data. So it looks like a lot more jobs and a little bit different wage because, again, we're going back to prior data and information right now when we created the DODL. We'll update the DODL as we have data available, and we're hoping IDS is able to provide some EDR and local specific data in the next several months, and at that point in time, it'll be available on WorkNet, and hopefully will be migrated to things like ONet Online and to BLS, which I'll touch on here in a minute. So we'll continue to share the information as necessary. As you see, that wage is very low compared to the statewide and national wages for that occupation. So you'll have to identify if that's good or not. And then the wages are only provided, the openings are only provided statewide as we didn't have anything locally. A third site is IDS's website, where you can go to their occupational employment statistics page and find the data that we actually use to create the list. This is what that site looks like. There's PDFs, Excel files, online produced documents that you can search for. Here you can look at they don't have specific EDRs or LWIAs, but you can find particular metropolitan statistical areas to get you as close as possible to that area. And as I mentioned, there's no local data yet. So if I put any of these search functions in the area, the EDR or the LWIA, we don't have it right now, but we will, hopefully in the near future. Another one is BLS. The only warning I give to that is BLS only has what Illinois gives it and what other states give it. So you may not find anything different here than what you could find on the other three resources, but you might try it and see if there's maybe something up there that helps you, again, identify from a board perspective other occupations that you might want to petition. You'll see that occupation falls here, and that data is in line with what we used, or close to in line with what we used to create the demand occupation training list, again, with changes if they have some newer data than what we used. You might go to private resources such as the Career One Stop website, where you can explore careers and get more information about your occupations. Again, here are titles, and you saw that on the ONet online website. Here are some of the common titles for this that fit into this occupational code. So, if you're looking at if the participant's looking and says, well, I don't see on your list collision repair technician, you would be able to say, well, that is the automotive body and repairs code, fits into this, fits into that classification. Shows you some of the data, again, similar to what we've seen already, and gives you just a little bit more about that job. So you can see down here what kind of ability. So, you know what, we're not all meant for all jobs. In a joking way, mommy always told us we could be whatever we want to be. Well, we might be able to, but maybe some things aren't what we want to be. And maybe some of these things are far beyond what we can pursue and truly achieve given the resources we have. So, what mom used to tell us always has a little bit of a caveat to it, I think. So make sure your customer understands, your participant understands all this information available. And then the last one is burning glass technologies. We've all heard of that. Not all of us have access to that, but maybe some of the LWIAs have purchased a membership to that site. Use that information. It might be some of the most up-to-date data from employers and might be one of the best resources if you have access. If you don't have access, you don't have a membership to it. Maybe one of your partner local areas have that. Maybe something in an upcoming IWP meeting can bring this up and say, hey, anyone got a membership here? Can we kind of piggyback on the information you can receive from it and show us if we have a need for it, and use some of the other local area resources to benefit your search. And this is what their site looks like. I couldn't get access to it because the state doesn't have that, so I can't really necessarily tell you what's all there, but I'm sure there's a wealth of information on that and more specific employer kind of based information. I think that's it. I'm going to take questions real quick, or we're close to being done. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Paula for time concerns to career planning requirements. So Paula, if you've got your line open now.
Hi, yes, I do. Thank you very much. Going into this, I just want to point out to Chris on his last question, and it feeds right into what I'm going to be talking about. So the demand occupation search that Mark presented, we're updating fields in WorkNet. That is the WorkNet search that will be updated by the demand occupation training codes, the new ONets. They're going to be updated in IWDS, and it will sync up to that search. When you go into your WIOA approved training program search, that isn't going to be updated necessarily based on the total, because we are not removing training programs from that list just because an associated ONet is no longer with that training program. And I will get into that. I just want to make that clear that there are two separate searches there. So so I will, moving right into some career planning requirements. Mark gave such good examples for the field to use when you're going through this thought process based on the new DODL that needs to coexist with these decisions since it is statewide. So geographically, it's on the statewide list, but it might not be in your area. And what we want to point out is that unless all of those activities and career planning and all of those thoughts and discussions are very clearly documented and being written in the participant's individual employment plan, or for youth, the service strategy, there will never be a way to trace the path that led you to those occupational decisions. And this may come up in monitoring at some point if an ONet you used and a decision was made for a participant to move into an occupation that they really weren't suited for. So that is our concern, and we think that everyone will do a great job, but we'll never know you did a great job unless it is very clearly documented in the IEP and ISS by using the system of record, which is the Illinois Workforce Development System. I know I'm being duplicative, but I just want to make sure that this is understood. So it's just so important to utilize that. And this slide is a good desk reference that Mark developed. And I know Jim Potts does training on these. So the individual service strategy and the IEPs, they're the key to success leading to sustainable employment. And that goes right back to the occupation you choose. It's a full assessment of existing skills, interests, work history, their barriers, and all of the expectations they have for their career and working and participating in the WIOA program. It should assist participants in making an informed decision leading to actionable steps. So it's our job to help the participants. And then again, the goals need to be documented. Every step should be planned to meet the education needs. Always in consideration of their location, especially important with the statewide list, and then substantial documentation. So you could even make a little checklist of that for some career planners, and then they will never fail to reiterate that in their plans. So the next slide, please. So there are occupations that are currently on the list, but they will no longer be on the list, as Mark explained. The data for those ONets does not meet the new criteria. So if they were in demand prior to July 1st of 2021, but they are not, you're not seeing them on the new list, here's how we are going to handle that. So when can you proceed with these trainings, knowing that come October, that specific ONet is not on the list? Here's how you justify it. If a career planner and a participant have spent a lot of time, significant staff time prior to July 1st with their assessments and research and discussion, and it's documented in the IEP or ISS in the system in IWDS, that is your justification for moving forward with an occupation, an ONet, that is set to expire. It's going to fall off. So in those cases, if you feel confident that enough time was spent and the participant, you inform the participant, look, when we talked about this, maybe in June, there was data saying that it's this many openings a wage based on new data. It's not the case for this occupation anymore. And depending on your discussions, you can move forward with that. However, just please be aware that it needs to be thoroughly documented in the IEP. And also what we're doing in the system is that IWDS will display a message. It hasn't been updated yet. So when a career planner goes to record a specific training service, say an occupational skills training, for either a new program for a provider, or while the participant is being rolled into a service, we're going to update the error message so that it says this ONet is set to expire. And so it's kind of that warning, make sure that you've spent time talking about it before it falls off. So the next slide, please. Okay, and this is just to provide everyone with an example. Anyone entering a new training program, and the other point is that your decisions should have been made based on all of the research that Mark explained with the scenario. All of those tools and resources should have been utilized to determine an approved ONet before you get to this stage. So this would be if a provider has submitted a new training program and that ONet code associated with the program is no longer on the list. Either A, you will be given an error message that it's not allowed. Currently, it just says it's not allowed for your region, but that's not the case anymore. So you'll be told it's not allowed, and to either A, go ahead, you might want to petition that the ONet be added, or B, work with the provider to update the program to align with an in-demand occupation based on the statewide total. And so this is just everyone, I'm sure most of you are aware and utilize this screen, and that is where the ONet is displayed. And of course, when you go to that list, once it's updated in the system, you'll be able to search only those that are approved or the ones that are set to fall off the list at the end of September. The next slide, please. This is an example. What we want to explain here once more is that this is the screen, add required activity and information in IWDS, where you would enroll a real life participant into a service. And this is when it comes down to it, the ONet code and that occupation must be attached to the certified training program like on the screen before, or you will not be able to move forward with enrolling that participant. So that's why it's so important to research your occupational decisions before this, because you don't want to get to the point with your participant, you didn't really research it and you're sitting here, you can't enroll them in the service and you might have to start over. So that research should be done way before this step of using the system to record it. At least one ONet code must be on the current demand occupation training list for it to be allowed to enroll in. And then once again, what we're going to do in IWDS is update some wording next to that highlighted field next to the ONet. So what it will display is that the tiers label, the priority label, and then the demand code and the color code. So it'll reiterate the list again, and you'll be able to easily see what tier you're enrolling in. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that was the end of my slides, and I haven't looked at the chat.
Thanks, Paul. And just to kind of finalize that, for those familiar with IWDS, we don't have the ability in that system to add actual color to the screens. So that's why we're using the words. It also helps with accessibility for someone who might have issues with colors. So the wording will be there to indicate the tier and the actual number associated with that tier, for lack of ability to have a color code. But WorkNet will have the color code, we hope, in there. So we've only got a few more minutes, and there are two questions I certainly want to address before we leave today's session. Lisa asked or pointed out that there what seemed to be an occupation or occupations that fell into the low priority red category that would appear to meet the criteria. And as we were looking through this in the last few days, we had identified some too. So we apologize. Somewhere in our sorting and functioning in our spreadsheet, we somehow missed some of the occupations, and it actually worked on both sides of that. Some were on there that probably shouldn't have made it on there. So we are going to be updating the demand occupation training list as soon as possible to reflect. We're going to go through these one by one. We apologize again that this occurred, and we're going to go through this list and get a new list out to you that reflects accurately all the criteria in considerations to whether it was demand or not. If we can do this, I think what we're also going to do to reduce confusion is either retitle or add to the title of that last tier. Instead of calling it low priority, we'll call it either low priority, not in demand, or just simply not in demand, because that is what it is. If it's in red, other than those that we again have identified should not have been in the red category, and once we remove them, that really is indication it's not in demand. So appreciate you catching that. If somebody sees one on the list, wants to email directly, Laura put that in the in the chat. Email me directly. I'll work with our team and get this list updated, hopefully by the end of the week or early next week to get accurate and reflect appropriately the criteria. And then probably one of the biggest questions, we had this come up last week directly to us, and we're waiting for this to present. And then just was evident that we need to respond to it today, is in the career pathways, when you look at the framework, we talk about career pathways and documentation, and the wording, I think, or we all think, isn't clear in what that is stating. So it doesn't state that somebody in an occupation in the yellow or orange tiered codes, which don't meet the highest level of criteria. We're not trying to indicate you have to go down a career pathway to a demand occupation. We just want you to ensure you've told and discussed and made decisions with your participant that they understand that if you're in the yellow code, going back to all of our earlier discussion, there's inherent potential challenges to getting employed and meeting your employment goals. So if it's a yellow tier goal, there may be very few openings. There may be lower wages, even though it might meet the criteria, so it falls into the yellow tiers. What we're saying is you need to make a concerted effort to tell the participant that this is something you might consider a career pathway in, not that you have to go into a career pathway. And that the only way you can enroll in the first or train towards the first occupation is that you're committing to the next occupation. Okay, so now in saying that, we have to review the list and make sure the list is accurate with that understanding. But we just want to make sure that if you're picking yellow tiers, that's probably going to require more documentation of discussions with that participant. And Laura or Paula, I don't know if you want to add, if you think that's clear in how I stated that, but we want to make sure it's a documentation and discussion issue, not a mandated going down the actual career pathway as the next steps.
Correct. And I made a comment to that in the chat, and I believe that we will probably ensure that we add that to the FAQ that will come out of this presentation that will be attached to the notice for the demand occupation training list.
Okay, so we've got another question. We do have a couple more minutes. Appreciate you sticking around to hear this. So LaDonna said she's confused on where to exactly find the total. So the demand occupation training list is tied to, I'm going to try to go back real quick here, if I can. You're going to find it tied to this policy, 7.3 ETPL. And you'll find the information. All right, Laura, help me where that slide is. Here. So if you go out to the Illinois WorkNet e-policy and go under the 7.3, the WIOA notices here, NOT-08, you see that as the third document. And then the actual list is attachment A, provides the framework, the criteria, the color coding charts, the charts on education and OJT, as well as the demand coding from 0 to 6. And then you'll see the petition and the instructions are here. So this is the right-hand column of any page in that ETPL policy. So you'll be able to see what the demand occupation training list is. We apologize. We wanted to get this out at the beginning of the program year, get it out early enough, especially with courses and training programs starting in the fall semester for those that are based on semesters. We wanted to get this out, but Illinois WorkNet is not yet updated to reflect this, but you'll also be able to know if something's in demand by going to the Illinois WorkNet site to see if it's in demand. So that answers the first part. The part about to list is the fact that if something was in demand prior to July 1st, it remains in demand until September 30th, but only for those participants who were already working with career planners to identify an occupation and potentially the training program associated with it. And those conversations and discussions and decisions were of significant enough value that they couldn't kind of change their mind and start down a different path. So there's a little bit of leeway there. We understand that. But you know, if all you've done is meet with a participant and say, we need you to understand that if you want to get a job, you may have to go into training, and we can discuss what the occupations are that are in demand, but that's all we can train for is in demand jobs, then you need to be using the most current list. That's effective July 1st. But if you've been working with that customer since, let's say, March, looking at their assessments, developing an IEP, identifying services, maybe prerequisites, enrolling them maybe in some courses to get them their high school equivalency, and said, that's all because I want to become an automotive repairer. And that was on the previous list, but not on the, that's a bad example because it's falling off the list. But if it was on the previous list and no longer going to be on the list, you can continue, because that customer's had a significant amount of work with the career planner to make a decision. We don't want them to have to restart their discussions and decisions if they've made significant progress. So, you know, you'll have to document all that. It simply can't state that significant progress has been made towards identifying an occupation, and we're going to keep using the old list. Because if you didn't tell me what the old list occupation was, there's no way you could have made a decision towards it. So that's hopefully the simplest way we can state how the two lists are kind of coexisting for a period of 90 days. And the purpose of the 90 days is to allow you to actually enroll, because IWDS won't let you enroll ahead of actual enrollment. You can't put that in June 15th so that you beat the July 1st deadline with enrollment, and the start of the class doesn't happen until September 1st. So we have to acknowledge the way the system works, acknowledge that you know, we can't enroll before we can enroll. And so we've given a 90-day period to complete those discussions, prepare for enrollment, actually get enrollment. We anticipate if it's more than 90 days for all that to happen after this July 1st, between July 1st and September 30th, it may be appropriate to talk with that participant again, remind them that we were working off of the old list, remind them that that occupation is no longer in demand and may not be the best decision for you now, even though we were talking about it before, and ask them if they really want to make a different decision to get a better job, basically. If not, if you are just in a tight pinch and can justify everything, and enrollment won't happen until, let's say, October 15th or something, email us and we'll talk you through it. We'll take everything into consideration and determine if it's appropriate for you to continue down the path you started before July 1st. But really, it's all about what is appropriate at the time this customer is enrolling, and then going to complete that training and start seeking that job. And, you know, someone could have made a decision back in April and we changed the job. You might now say, oh my goodness, the things have changed. You might go back to the participant and say, hey, I just want to make you aware, you don't enroll till August 1st, but that job's fallen off the list. It's not really in demand anymore. And here's the information we have. Do you still want to go down this path, or do you want to consider something that might be more, you know, more suitable, more appropriate with given information of, you know, more current information? So took a long time to say something simply that I thought I would, but hopefully that kind of helps you through that, the two list thing, the career pathway in the framework, and any other questions that you presented today in the chat. We're going to respond in the FAQ. So we'll hopefully get that out in the next couple of weeks. We want to get them all in there. We'll have to sync similar questions, one is similar responses, so we don't have too many repetitions. And if you have any other questions that come up now that you've heard this webinar, now that you've taken a look at all the information, feel free to email us. Appreciate if you use that DOTL email that we provided earlier. And I'm going to get back to the bottom to give you those emails again. So here's who you would contact. Please use the, you know, for petitions, use that email. You can use it for your questions as well. All three of us will then see them. That's the purpose, again, of having a focused email like that, is so three of us see it, not just one of us. But if you email one of us, we're going to share the information and have discussions amongst all of us. So we'll be posting that FAQ as soon as we can complete it. Make sure it's accurate, make sure it addresses all of your questions from today and in the next coming days. Appreciate if you would complete the survey that Molly spoke to once we close this session out. And also they'll send you out a survey, I think, in the next coming days, but I'll turn it back to Molly to kind of finalize the survey, or I'm sorry, the webinar. We really appreciate your participation, appreciate the questions and input you have. Hopefully we've helped you out. What we do know is that this will prompt a future conversation and webinar specific to career planning that will either be specifically around new policy, or in the interim more about career planning as it relates to the demand occupation training list. If it warrants, maybe it warrants just a half hour or 45-minute discussion that we can piggyback on another WIOA Wednesday webinar. If it seems like we should do that before the policy comes out. And before anyone asks, we don't have a projected date for new policy on career planning. We're working through with it on with a work group of the board, or not that one. We're working it through internally now. So hopefully we'll get that out. But we will be providing more technical assistance in addition to this webinar and the guidance that'll be found in the FAQ. Appreciate again everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Molly.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone again for attending today's webinar. As stated earlier, I put the survey in the chat box. The first link I sent you was the wrong survey, so I'm sorry I put the wrong one in there to start, but the link that you see is correct now. And if you could take that, if you want to take that immediately now while everything's fresh in your head, you could do that, or like Mark said, wait for the follow-up email. So thank you again so much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.